U.S. warplanes carried out a strike on an Iran-linked weapons storage facility in eastern Syria in response to multiple attacks against American troops. The U.S. is striving to deter Iran and its proxies from turning the Israeli-Hamas fighting into a wider conflict, a regional war. However, repeated attacks and strike risk a conflict between Washington and Tehran. It is the second time in roughly 2 weeks that the U.S. has targeted a location in Syria it said was tied to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC. Tehran supports an array of armed groups that Washington blames for a spike in attacks on its forces in the region. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin stated that U.S. forces hit a weapons storage facility in eastern Syria used by the IRGC. He added that the strike was conducted by two F-15 fighter jets. A senior U.S. defense official said that the strike was being combined with very clear messaging through multiple channels. And the message, the U.S. official said, is to Iranian senior leaders: direct your proxies and militia groups to stop attacking the United States. The U.S. military hit two facilities in Syria on October 26th that it said were used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and affiliated groups. Like the most recent strike, Washington said the earlier two were in response to attacks on U.S. personnel. U.S. personnel have been targeted over 40 times with rockets and drones since October 17th. The surge in attacks on U.S. troops is linked to the war between Israel and Hamas. There are roughly 2,500 American troops in Iraq and some 900 in Syria as part of efforts to prevent a resurgence of the Islamic State, known as ISIS. Those terrorists once held significant areas in both countries, but were pushed back by local ground forces supported by international airstrikes in a bloody multi-year conflict. In another incident linked to the Israel-Hamas war, the Iran-backed Houthi rebel in Yemen said that they shot down an American drone. The Houthis are opposed to government forces in Yemen and are also part of the axis of resistance against Israel, controlled by Tehran. They claimed responsibility for multiple drone and missile attacks against Israel during its war with Hamas. Last month, U.S. Navy intercepted missiles fired by the rebels, a series of MQ-9 UAVs, which can be used for surveillance and strikes, have been lost or damaged in recent years, including one the U.S. assessed was downed by Houthis in 2019. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Mark Merowitz, professor at State University of New York Maritime College. Mark is joining us from New York. Mark, great to see you, and thank you for joining us on WION. Wow, what a few weeks it's been. And these multiple fronts that are opening up against the United States in the Middle East are nothing short of concerning. Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, all believed to be backed by Iran, not to mention IRGC, Quds affiliates in Syria as well, and Iraq. I'm sorry. So can you give us a sense of the size of the challenge that the United States faces in the Middle East? And is Iran getting the message?
Well, I mean, I think you indicated that Iran, Tehran, is not getting a message because they're rejecting the G7 statement that they should stop supporting Hamas. But actually, Iran is the puppet master in the world and is malevolent force with all of these factors that you mentioned in motivating Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th, which completely dislocated any equilibrium there was. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Syria, they're everywhere creating imbalance, chaos, and violence and destruction to civilians. And the United States really was caught napping here, asleep, because what was the American administration doing under President Obama and then under President Biden, wanting to do a nuclear deal with Iran? Can you imagine? Just the way you just posed the question. Iran is creating all this violence in the region and in the world. And at the same time, the United States wants to do a deal with them to allow them, in effect, to have what they say is peaceful nuclear power, which is completely a charade as well. So I think Americans have a wake-up call here, in addition to the fact that Americans have been taken hostage, and we don't see any solution to the problem of those hostages who were taken on October 7th, including American hostages. So we're in a very, very big problem. I think the world is experiencing what I think Chancellor Scholz of Germany called a Zeitenwende, which is a tectonic shift in politics, a tectonic shift where the world is now teetering and tottering in violence and confusion, and we have to get things back right as soon as possible, or we're going to face a very, very bleak future.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not clear how much President Biden going on TV and repeating the word "don't" is really going to help the situation as well. There are these calls and discussions over ceasefires, humanitarian pauses, and whatnot. And, at times the release of hostages seem to be lost in many conversations, but it seems that the Secretary of State and others are working on that, and the Israelis on their side as well. But with everything that you mentioned and all that's going on, how far are we from things settling down and calming down?
Well, it depends on where you're looking at it from. I mean, in other words, the way in which to solve the problem, I mean, to be very candid, is to eliminate Hamas as an active. I mean, the head of Hamas said, we're going to do it again and again and again. President Biden said, don't, to Iran. Well, something's got to give here. So Iran's got to stop supporting Hamas. Hamas has to be eliminated. There's no question about it. I mean, we see what they did on October 7th. I mean, that precipitated the whole thing. The crisis that you have now, and you quoted the United Nations, another point is the United Nations is a disaster. That's your disaster. The UN and UN agencies have only caused problems in the world. They can't function. They're dysfunctional. The Secretary General is a partisan who takes one side of the issue, and that's not the way Dag Hammarskjöld or other great secretaries general handled things, which is to be part of the problem and not part of the solution. And also, I thought it was interesting when you quoted the WHO statistics. How do they get those statistics? Those statistics that they're quoting, that the UN is quoting, are directly attributable to Hamas, which is quite extraordinary if you think about it. They have numbers that they throw out without verification, and it's repeated in the press repeatedly, which culminated also in the situation with the bombing of the hospital, if you remember, where the New York Times came out and apologized. And they said, we listened too carefully to Hamas's information. So what you have here is misinformation, disinformation, confusion. And guess who suffers? Civilians. Civilians all through the region. And who precipitated it? Hamas. So they should release the hostages. And as you say, Susan, the discussion of the hostages doesn't always get first and foremost discussion. And the war will end if Hamas ends its attacks and ends its violent activities, which it doesn't seem to want to do because it's egged on by Iran. So I say all roads lead to Iran, and something needs to be done by the world against this sort of axis of Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. And that's at least the way I think the leadership in the United States is looking at this. And I think that's the credible way to look at it. Because if you don't do anything about this, you don't have a concerted effort to do in effect, a containment or pushback and dealing with this, it's only going to spread, I think, as you said, to a global conflagration, which, is just frightening beyond belief.
Yeah, with all the threats that we're seeing against Israel and the Jewish population, we know that something's going to give here in the United States as well sooner or later. I mean, when the FBI director says it, and he's usually very cautious, then we should take them for their words. Mark, thank you so much for joining us, giving us your clarity and perspective, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Same here, Susan.